So I hope I should have asked how to pronounce your name properly, Joal. Joal. So you've worked with the Council for Homeless Persons in the Peer Education Support Program for several years. In this role, she draws on her experience of not having a home to improve the sector and government response to homelessness. In 2019, Joal was recruited to CHP's Peer Support Resettlement Project as a peer support worker. She's outposted to the street to home team with Launch Housing, where she supported people who were recently housed to resettle and stabilise. Joal was subsequently employed directly by Launch Housing as a peer support worker and continues to work in the Street to Home program. She also works with Launch Housing as a peer support worker in the South Bank Crisis Accommodation Service. Joal was a strong advocate for ending homelessness and is a strong advocate for ending homelessness and promotes the value of lived experience in the specialist homeless sector and beyond. And she's probably had half her speech just taken up by everyone else stealing her thunder. So I'm sure we can get a really good perspective of this program from you, and you're the one at the at the coalface. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yes, you said my name right, Joel. I also want to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I'm on today, which is the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to say always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So all of this, for me, I am the peer support worker who's had all this training and who carries this knowledge into my workplace every day. And it's definitely been valuable having a framework of intentional peer support to work within, because it does give me a strong foundation what to base my practice on and to base my discipline on every day. And I am a strong believer in I don't do peer drift, because I understand the value of my work and I understand the value of a peer support worker in a multidisciplinary team and in the sector. So I don't do peer drift. I know my value, and I heard Ian before speak about a quote, and that was the person I worked with, who said, when I met her for the first time, and in the first 5 minutes of meeting her, she said to me, "Wow, you've been homeless too, so you get it." And I said, "Yeah, I get it." And she said, "Oh my God, so this is going to end for me one day. Like, look at you. You're working now. This is going to end for me one day." And I'm like, "Yeah, this is going to end for you one day." And she said, "I didn't realize that, homelessness would end for me. I thought this was my life forever." So I obviously work with people who are long-term rough sleepers who have just entered a tenancy, and I obviously help to sustain their tenancy. And what does that look like for me in my everyday role? I have conversations with people and I speak to people about what is important to them. And I'm not outcomes focused. I'm not task focused. I'm someone who provides a safe space for people to be themselves, to let them speak without judgment. And I am just sometimes the only place of safety for people. And you said earlier on, Mike, that, why would a 55-year-old, listen to someone young just coming into the sector? Well, I work with people 55-year-old plus, and I'm 34, and they listen to me because not that we've had the same experiences in life, but because we connect in a way that is meaningful to them, right? So they know with me, they're not going to be judged, that I will listen, that I'll provide that safety where they can just be themselves. And, you know, my trauma and their trauma, like it's not a trauma competition, you know, what I might not have been through, what they've been through. They haven't been through what I've been through, but we find a place to connect anyway. And we work like what do I end up doing with people? It's whatever they want. It's whatever they think that I'll be yeah, whatever they want to disclose to me, we just kind of go from there. And it's really person led in that way. So that's basically the crux of my whole role is connection and speaking with people, and what happens if there's disconnection and why, and how do we work through that. And we do that together. And I think because of that safe space, we can have really you know, deep conversations, and I can provide that time that others in the team can't. You know, the nurses are doing health stuff, case managers are doing paperwork and, you know, applications. And I'm there to be emotional support and, you know, be there for that person in a different way, you know, that only a peer can. And I've been working also at the South Bank Crisis Accom, and I've had other teams try to poach me and say, why don't you come and work on the AOD team? Come and be an AOD worker. Come and be this, come and be that. And I always say, no, I'm happy doing peer work. Yeah, peer work is what I want to do, you know? And I think that speaks volumes to what the peer role is, and also intentional peer support. And it's a great framework to work, to base all my work from. I really want questions. There's been so much said, like I really want questions. Mike, do you have any questions? There's been so much said already.
I've so many questions because, you know, we could talk about all the processes and all the, you know, the office stuff, but how does so you've got the the client, for want of a better word, you've got you and you've got the caseworker. How do you all work together? And, you know, are you an interface between the caseworker and the client, or are you explaining
Definitely.
the client's issues to the caseworker so that
Yes.
they understand it better? How does it all fit?
That's exactly 100% what I do as well. I'm kind of the middleman, I feel. I'm the middleman between the case manager and the client 100%, because I've found this so many times that the case manager has said the same thing 3 times to a client. The client didn't understand it the way the case manager was trying to get it through. I can kind of be a bit of an interpreter, a bit of a middleman to say, this is really what they're saying. This is what they're, you know, trying to get at. And then the client's like, why didn't they just say that? So I can kind of be I'm a bit of an interpreter and kind of, you know, get things done a bit faster, because I build rapport with someone in 5 minutes, as, you know, Ian's example earlier. Um, yeah, so 100% I am a bit of a conduit between the case managers and clients. And, you know, Cass said as well, and everyone said it as well, that, you know, the managers and have to really be on board and really kind of have your back as a peer worker, because that's what, you know, the team needs to accept you. The case managers have to accept you and respect you as part of the team and as part of the multidisciplinary team that you are obviously in. But I tell you what, once the case managers see the work that I do with people and how I build rapport very quickly, and, you know, they've been working with people for 2 months and I've worked with them twice and I've heard a million more things than they have, they see the value of peer work pretty quickly. So they have embraced, my team has embraced me really well. But if we don't all work together, you know, it wouldn't work as well, because a lone peer worker doing peer work on their own as it is, and then not having a team not accept you, would be a very hard place to be. So that's why the community of practice is so important as well. It's so important just to have, someone else with the same role as you to discuss your days and what that looks like and what the challenges are. And just to bounce ideas off and stuff like that is very, very important. I think anyone with just one role that in a team would be really hard. But I think particularly, having one peer worker in a team, it can be done, and I've proven it can be done. But there definitely needs to be a community of practice. And why is it so hard? Well, we come from a trauma background in homelessness. Homelessness equals trauma, number one. So we need to have others who we don't need to kind of explain everything to before we speak about our work, because that's what happens. Case managers they haven't had that lived experience. So we do need others with sort of the same background as us to kind of have that support in that role. Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, there's more homeless people moving into housing and more case workers and case managers than there are peers. So when you're working with an organisation, how do you work out who you're going to work with? Do you just have a conversation with everyone, and then some people are obviously quite okay to work with a case manager without your involvement, where some others might need more interaction? So how has that worked out, which people you take on, which clients you're referred to, or how does that work?
Well, particularly in my team, what we literally had a meeting with like a team meeting, and I said to everyone, you guys know what a peer worker is, you know what I'm all about. Who do you think that you work with that will benefit from having a peer worker and that extra support? And someone who maybe you're even disconnected with, that you need someone kind of in the middle to kind of facilitate that connection just between case manager and client. Someone who's just moved into a home, who's having a lot of trouble sustaining tenancy, and you don't understand why, sort of thing. So I kind of left it up to the case managers and the manager to be like, well, I've just entered this team. You've had this long-standing relationship with these people. Who do you think will benefit from me? And they just put names. They just gave me names at the next meeting, and I started working with people and started connecting with people. Yeah, as simple as that.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to do that referral process, but that was just what we did, very informal, and just kind of, that's just what we chose to do.
Yeah. So in the Northern Territory, and I might have mentioned this in our meeting the other day, so we've got 13% of the national problem. We get 1% of the funding for that problem, which means that there's a lot of clients and not a lot of caseworkers. So everyone's caseloads are massive. What would your caseload be? What would your ideal caseload be? Say, how many clients at once, or how much time do you spend? Because obviously some people are going to need a lot of time, and others are just going to be, she's cool.
Yeah. It depends on the hours the case manager works as well. So
for you though, so how much?
So I work, what do I work? 18 hours a week.
Yep.
So say 2 days in a meeting. I have about 6 clients. But I could definitely have more. It's just, so as I said before, people with homelessness obviously have a huge trauma background. So it depends what's going on for that person at that time is what our connection looks like. Yeah, I hope that, does that answer
Just
your
thinking,
question?
and this is where Ian and the others could maybe jump in. So I'm just thinking, if we were to start a small program like you guys did, you could easily burn out peer support workers just by the massive amount of need and the expectation and people trying to help everyone. How do you manage that? How do you get the right ratio so that when someone is moving into this space, that they're just not inundated? And
Well, I think, Mike, that the key thing for us, and that came up, we had lots of discussions about X amount of hours, how many would they be? But ultimately, I think that comes down to how critical it is that, so it's not a peer worker who's got these group of clients in isolation, that it's a multidisciplinary team. So the models that our model worked within were streets to home, which were intensive case management, post-homelessness intensive case management. Then that whole team has a caseload. And then I think where the organisations landed is they all answer that question differently in terms of how much time would the peer worker work with maybe a little bit of peer worker across all the client base would be perfect, or in some cases like Joel's more, let's target someone, and then it's not really the peer worker, it's really the team itself. Again, that sort of crashes up a little bit to what I was saying before about when you sort of forward the challenge of the widgets. Like, we see X amount of widgets, and this is how we can divide up our case management hours, and so intentional peer support or peer support generally doesn't fit super well with that. But really, that's again, if they're part of a team, then that's a team decision about what's our caseload. So our team of 3 case managers, a peer support worker, and a nurse, maybe we're seeing 25 people, that's our 40 people, whatever that. And then within that group, there's the decision about, well, how many people will the peer worker see? And again, then it's sort of not about the caseload of the peer worker as such, it's about the team's caseload. And within the multidisciplinary team, the same question would be of the nurse. Well, how many of these people do the nurse see? Or how many? It's no silver bullet, obviously, having peer workers. It's not going to stretch across and fix all of those sorts of support gaps. I think that's a really good question for teams to have then, because then we go, well, what are we trying to achieve with our clients, and who's best fixed or positioned to help us achieve that? And then, that's that conversation with the clients, is we have this resource or opportunity, who would like to take advantage of it. So
could I just add to that too, because that an interesting conversation's come up in the community of practice meetings more recently that relates to that. And what the peer support workers were saying is, you might, for example, when you're first employed, the team decide that, all right, we're going to start with 6 or whatever people that someone can work with. The importance is to approach this peer support role in all aspects with that really trauma-informed understanding. So there needs to be, because they are drawing on a traumatic experience as a part of their role, there needs to be that flexibility, and understand that someone might do fine with 6 at one time and then feel mentally drained at another time and have to pull back to 2 people. Other times they're on fire, and so that they might be up to 10. So it's about really trying to understand where the peer support worker is at and what they trying to have that really open communication, so people feel honest enough to say to you, I'm not doing so, they don't even have to say I'm not doing so well. They can just say, I need to pull back on how many people I'm supporting right now. And if I take a day off, it might be a mental health day, but I don't have to necessarily tell you that if I'm not comfortable with it. And you shouldn't probably say, oh, you're taking a day off instead of a mental health day, because you probably wouldn't say it to someone else. So those are a couple of things that more recently that I think are really important to keep in mind too.
And I mean, again, for us, we had and maybe this is something that you might end up doing, we put forward a proposal as part of a grant application for philanthropic. So we worked out a lot of those details ahead of time. In a normal course of events, and Wellways is probably a better place to sort of talk to this, but it's where your organisational support is. You run it. I think it's, for us, we see a challenge moving forward with peer support more generally in our sector to say, well, if we employ a peer worker, that's going to take money away from we would otherwise employ a case manager. And with our case manager, we can see 12 people. You know, that's that thing about, I guess, that tension that you've got when you want to be person-centred, but you're thinking, well, our target is 40 people. The two aren't necessarily, there's a tension between the two. And it doesn't apply very well to being sort of peer, like intentional peer support about, because it suggests, well, the more people we see, the better we'll do, because that's what we're funded to see, as opposed to moving to, I know Joel says she does put a focus on outcomes, but we in Victoria, we're wanting to move at CHP. We want the sector to move towards outcomes, not throughputs, not how many people we're seeing, but how really, and it goes back to for us, that project was all about, we want people who, they're living in the house, but is it a home for them? And, you know, we had in the discussions in that forum that we had, we asked that question, how do you know when it's a home? And one fella said that, well, I knew it was a home when I could invite someone into my home. And I felt comfortable saying, come here. And I said, we asked him how long that was. He was 3 years in his house before he invited a single other person into his house, because it took him that long to feel as if it was his home. So for us, we think peer support can help make that a much quicker process. And for us, that's what success looks like. But, you know, that's a bit hard to quantify, I guess. So, Mike, just before I meant to say when I was speaking, I wanted to make sure that I did, is that one of the things that I was really interested in when you contacted me is I think there's a huge opportunity for intentional peer support to be explored within an Aboriginal context. I feel like, and I don't know, I don't want to make presumptions, but I feel like the model has got lots of synergy with ways that I know that Aboriginal workers work, and some of the struggles that they have in terms of community and working with family and those sorts of things. But there's some, because we looked around quite a lot, and there were very few other intentional peer support models in the homelessness sector anywhere, and none that were Aboriginal specific. And I think that would be a huge opportunity for a funding position in terms of philanthropics, because it's, you know, philanthropic funders love new things, new programs that show or demonstrate something. And, you know, I think that would be incredibly interesting and powerful to find out how peer support could work in an Aboriginal context, in Aboriginal housing, Aboriginal supports. What would it mean? How would it be different? What sort of things work well? What wouldn't work well? But yeah, I just think there's a huge opportunity in that space, and would love to see Northern Territory sort of lead with it, because I think it could, you know, really be an important thing to move towards in terms of sustainability. And, you know, ultimately we want people's housing to thrive and be happy. And, you know, the obvious thing is that will reduce the amount of housing breakdowns from a practical point, but you'll also get people who are engaged in the community, and, you know, maybe they'll become peer workers and working, and there's also huge employment opportunities. You know, that was a big thing we get from PESP members all the time, and saying there's just not work out there, and I don't want to have to do a social work degree to compete. If you can create a meaningful group of peer roles within a sector, so, you know, then there is a pathway for people into, and it's a good way to sort of promote diversity of the workers.
Yeah, it's always something I've thought about, that the Australian government invested $1 billion in housing up here over the SIHIP program. The Northern Territory government's budgeted for $1 billion over the next 10 years, with $500 million from the federal government over the next 5 years. that's a lot of assets. And when you're putting that much new asset into a community that really has a lot of overcrowding and a lack of, households that have their own home, to me, peer support could be about preserving those assets. So
Yeah.
just so to build, if you're missing so many houses that you've got sometimes up to 20 people living in a house, building a house and moving 5 of those people out in that house is not necessarily going to work.
And also experience the sort of something that we've been told from Aboriginal workers is, for instance, the challenge of we have transitional properties where you do have other people who aren't on the lease there. And then the people who have got the lease are under pressure because of that. They're saying, well, they're not on the lease. They're saying, well, but family, I mean, and I think that's a very hard thing for if you're not Aboriginal to really fully understand. But if you're Aboriginal, you come from a place of pure understanding around that. And so I think that's a good example. I mean, there's probably any number of other examples, but just knowing if you had a worker who understood without having to explain why that's such an important thing, that I think that, it lends itself to working super well in Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, that's great. Just back to Joel. So we talked about you working between the caseworker and the client. Do you actually step in and support the client with other, like, if they're in public housing, do you support them with their public housing tenancy manager, or do you support them when they're, doing some of that other stuff that's not necessarily has a caseworker involved, or is that the caseworker's job?
That's the caseworker's job.
Yep.
Something I would do is I would go to care team meetings or case coordination meetings with a whole range of services. It could be justice, mental health, AOD, whatever, and I'd attend that meeting as well, just as another support for that person, to get my head around the plan of support for that person. Yeah, so no, that sort of thing I don't think is a peer worker's role, but at the same time, sustaining tenancy isn't easy. It's not an easy space to work in. I'm not going to say that, yeah, with people who've had who've experienced long-term trauma and they get a home for the first time, as Ian said earlier, it's not a good time for people. It can be really challenging. It can be a time where people fall apart because they've been in fight or flight for so long, and then they get a home and their emotional brain opens again and they start to feel things and remember things about their trauma. And this is the reality of it, and this is the work and the space that I work in every day, navigating these tricky conversations and navigating these spaces for people where I can remain a safe space for people, to talk about whatever they need to talk about in that moment. But this work, yeah, it's sustaining tenancies is not an easy space to work in, regardless if you're a case manager or a peer worker. There's always going to be stuff that arises, but definitely when I hear people I work with say, today I don't want to talk to my case manager, I only want to talk to you. I know that, I've kind of, not that I've done something right, but at least I can say that at least that person's still wanting to speak to someone, and not totally disengaging, and no one's ever hearing from them again, So, yeah, peer workers are definitely great at navigating tricky spaces in this sustaining tendencies sort of niche.
thank you for that. Actually, guys, thank you all. So we asked for 2 hours of your time, which you've gracefully given us, and it's coming up to 2 hours. You can stay and chat for longer because these Zoom things don't end. You can keep going. We've had a good audience, so it was up to 24 people. We know some people are sharing screens. Ian, thanks for letting the government off the hook by saying we should go to philanthropy because the government's listening to this conversation. They're saying,
go to government too. Well, you can go to government with that proposal too. You've got employment there, you've got sustainability, you've got reducing turnovers. They're the sorts of things that all governments like to hear, people into employment. The other thing, just as a pitch, I'd say is that, again, I come back to the advisory group, and anyone who's interested up in NT or who's there today to get involved in that, because that's where really some of those discussions were super. One, they're really interesting, and you've got people who are you've got your champions there. They're energized, and two, but it's just some of those practical things like how many, how long, how many clients, what do you do? I think they're really important, and the Northern Territory is going to be a whole lot of different things to consider, obviously, just because it's a different place in communities. But having said that, I think that there's, real, at the heart of it, there's when it's done properly and done well, there's, peer support's probably the same in many ways, whether it's mental health or disability or, or in homelessness or in crisis or in sustaining tenancy. The core of it should be the same, particularly if you go back to having a framework like intentional peer support is the touchstone. Then beyond that, it's just the tweaking to make it work for the specific circumstances. I think one of the things we want to do is to create a network of people in our space, but also in others where we can learn and share and, and start to build up a real, I guess, momentum around the importance of it and move it away from thinking this is about helping people get jobs. This is not about peer workers as well, just because they've had a lived experience of homelessness, they can be a good peer worker. That's just not the case. And it's peer worker, again, that discipline, bring something to the table, bring something to a team that you just can't get elsewhere. It doesn't mean that a case manager is not important. The case management role is super, super important. Support, super important. And I saw the comment before from Vicky, I think, and it's exactly right. Like the rapport, case managers, their number one skill should be building engagement and skill with people, and the best case managers do that. And meaningful relationships. That's because people want. So the role isn't about replacing other roles. The role is really about making a team and a better collectively to get outcomes. I think the things like employment are bonuses, and creating pathways. We're doing a workforce development strategy in Victoria for our sector, CHP, and a real challenge for us is getting diverse group of people working at organisations because, the education, we've created all of these barriers for workers, and this is one way to address that. So.
Just quickly, I've put us on gallery view so everyone can see us all together rather than just the one speaking. Because we want to get a project advisory group going, what level of organisational participant is best for that? Caseworker, case manager, program manager, operations manager, CEO? Where would you think the best, or is it about the skill of the person and their drive? I mean, where would you, if you were to pick the ideal 4 people from the agencies that you work with, where would you want them sitting?
Oh, with us, we started with the managers of the programs the teams were going to sit in. And as the advisory group went along, it ended up being because when the advisory group was meeting down the track, it was more about the peer support workers are there, they're doing their job now. Let's reflect on, what do we need to change as we go? What's working well and we need to keep, that sort of stuff. So then we brought in the direct managers of the peer support workers more so. because they knew more about what was going on a day-to-day basis.
And our situation was a bit different because CHP put in a funding grant with the City of Melbourne and Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation with a Innovate grant, it was called. So thanks to both those organisations, we put in the grant application and got it, and then formed the advisory group. So we've had an advisory group that was set up to action our project, basically. So we had a year of designing it, and we used the advisory group knowing that we had the funding. So it depends at which stage you formed it. If you were setting up an advisory group to getting it to promoting it, you might want CEO, government, and a range of stakeholders at the table to drive it, to make it happen. If you're getting it up to help design the program, then in many respects, the key people are the sort of people who are going to be managing the programs and the team leaders themselves. And of course, people with lived experience are critical in that. So.
Yeah, can I jump in there? Every new program should be developed by people who would be using the program. They're the cornerstone. So we need managers, we need organisations, but the people we should really be listening to are the people that utilise the service the most. People who are experiencing difficulties, they are our ultimate guide around what will be successful.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming. If you've got anything else to say, feel free to spark up. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support you've given me over the last month or so. I mean, we've been tossing this around, I think, last year, and we sent emails off, but we got to a point, which is great. I firmly see this as something that can add to the sector, and I've supported my clients in meetings with third parties, and I'm just amazed at how they get spoken at by officialdom, and I think someone needs to support people in those situations, and we always talk about how we get more consumer-led programs, and I think most of the organisations have that built into their funding contracts, that it's about getting feedback and consumer-led design in programs, but I don't know how well that happens. And if you don't have a really good peer support, your PESP program, that feeds into that. I mean, how do you do it if you're just an agency talking to your staff and not going further? So I think there's a lot of thought to be had, but yeah, we'll definitely be catching up with you, Ian, and trying to get some of that the documentation and the gear that you've developed. We need to get a program going here. So anyone, just feed me the names. It doesn't have to be you, but it'd be someone in your organisation that you think would be ideal working in this space. So get back to me on that, and we'll be sending out a questionnaire to everyone after this to see what they thought. But once again, thank you guys, and I'll walk outside with no face mask, go to the footy, sit next to someone.
Yeah.
Go to
tomorrow's our big day. We've got another announcement of things. So we'll all come up there this time next year.
Yeah, and then
for the launch of your peer.
No, we'll be shutting the joint because you'll be in your 10th lockdown for some hotel breach of coronavirus. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Daisy, when you get up here on a holiday, look us up. You got my email, and
I'll be seeing you then.
We'll show you some crocodiles.
Thanks
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day.
See you, Mike.